Hello, my darlings. Today we're going to be reviewing the 1982 Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania shooting. This was done by George Banks. No, not that one. This is George Emil Banks. George was born and raised in a suburb of Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania in 1942, and at the time the city population was about 80% white. George was a mixed-race child, his mother being Caucasian and his father being of African-American descent. George struggled immensely with severe racism as his mother was ostracized from marrying and having a child with a black man. This affected George drastically at his young age. At 17 years old, he joined the Army. Unfortunately, he was discharged just 2 years later as he seemed to have a hard time dealing with people of authority. In 1961, George and his accomplices robbed a South Scranton store with a shotgun. The store owner was shot, but he did survive. George served 8 years in prison for his assistance in that crime, but in 1969 he was released. That same year, he married a woman by the name of Doris, and they had 2 daughters together. 5 years later, the couple divorced, as George had impregnated another woman named Regina Clemens. Now, this is about to get very complex and confusing, so I'm going to do my best to break it down for you. George bought a home in 1982 where he lived with Sharon Mazzillo, Regina Clemens, and her sister Susan Yahas. George was involved with all 3 women and fathered multiple children between the 3 of them. A little later on, George introduced Dorothy Lyons to the household, and she quickly became pregnant. This proved to be way too much for Sharon, so she took her son and moved 4 miles down the road. This sparked a custody battle between her and George. Sharon refused to comply with the custody agreement and kept her son with her at all times. At the time, George was working as a correctional officer in Camp Hill, Pennsylvania. But with the added stress and the strain of all the children and their mothers, George was showing severe mental distress. They found that he wrote in a journal, and I quote, "I feel that I am insane. I have the impulse to take the shotgun out onto the catwalk and kill some inmates. I can't think. I'm writing one word at a time. I beg Allah for help, please. My young children come to play, and in vain. They ask for me. What has this white man and his senseless racism done to me? Will I live to see my children grow?" After that, he confided in a coworker about his family problems and that he wanted to go to the tower and blow his brains out. George was put on medical leave and was referred to a mental health center where he had 3 evaluations done. 8 days prior to the shootings, the doctor found that George was not a danger to himself or to others, and he just scheduled a follow-up appointment for him within a couple of days. The doctor was wrong. Very, very wrong. On the evening of September 24th, George went to a party with Dorothy and Regina. He left the party and returned home on his own, where he consumed multiple prescription pills and drank straight gin. He then called Dorothy at the party and asked her to bring home his AR-15 as he had left it at his sister's house where she was at. Apparently, he explained to her that he was planning on taking a trip up into the mountains with it. On the morning of September 25th, 1982, George woke up to find the AR-15 next to him. He loaded the gun with a 30-round magazine and proceeded to murder Dorothy, her daughter from a separate relationship, Regina, and Susan, along with 4 of his very own children. He then left the home dressed in a military flight suit. He came across 4 teenagers outside. He fired 2 shots, striking 2 of the teens. One of them did not survive. He then stole a car and drove to Sharon's home. He broke into her trailer and shot to death Sharon and their son, then turned the gun onto Sharon's mother Alice and her nephew Scott. The entire shooting spree lasted about 45 minutes. George jumped into his car and took off. He then ditched that car and stopped a motorist near the Cabernet Lounge in Wilkes-Barre. George forced the man out of his truck at gunpoint and took the truck, hoping that that would confuse police. He then drove to the east end of the city, where he abandoned the truck, then walked to a secluded area and was still feeling the effects from the drugs and alcohol that he took the night before, and he passed out. When he woke up, he ran to his mother's home, where he told her everything that he did. She was in disbelief and thought that he was just being delusional. At that point, she called the home to see if everyone was okay, but the police were already there, and the detective spoke with her. George took the phone from her and then made her take him to his friend's house. When the police were able to talk with George's mother again, she reluctantly informed the police where he was at. George had barricaded himself in the house by the time that the cops got there. During the standoff, George informed the police that he had killed all of his children simply because he didn't want them to suffer the racism he had to endure his entire life. George was acting extremely delusional and confused during the standoff, so the police made a fake radio broadcast which reported that the children were still alive and being treated at a local hospital. This was enough to get George to surrender, and he was taken into custody. During the trial, both the defense and the prosecution psychiatrists agreed that George was a disturbed and paranoid man. He was suffering from paranoid psychosis. This is a mental disorder that changes a person's perceptions and generates delirium. In a nutshell, you see things differently than what they actually are. Now, they say that this is a very rare disorder. But I gotta tell ya, based on some of the people I know, I don't really think it's that rare. The disagreement between the psychiatrists is to whether George was able to distinguish right from wrong and the impact of his actions. The jury, despite the evidence, rejected the insanity defense. They convicted George of 12 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of third-degree murder, 1 count of attempted murder, and other related charges. He was sentenced to death in June of 1983. Since then, George filed multiple appeals. His date of execution was signed twice by the governor of Pennsylvania, but attorneys were able to delay it again and again by filing more appeals. He spent 39 years and 9 months on death row. He was evaluated and reevaluated multiple times, and then finally on May 12, 2010, he was declared too incompetent to be executed. At the time of this video, he is 80 years old and currently residing at SCI Phoenix in Pennsylvania and is suffering from liver cancer. That's it for today, guys. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on your notifications because you don't want to miss the next video. As always, take care, stay safe, and thanks for listening.